Well, hello folks, and welcome to episode 241 of Retropower and Cut. And here we are as usual, fabrication shop, very quiet today. Bobby is on holiday. Matthew is at a steam rally in the rain currently, and Stu is working, but I've just told him not to hammer things, so he's most upset. So we're going to start with the Scimitar and the E-Type today. You're not going to see a dramatic amount of change in here this week because there hasn't been a dramatic amount of change in here this week. The next phase of work on the Scimitar was on two fronts. One is to continue with the chassis. The second was the body. And to that end, you may recall from previous episodes, we had a visit from Penta Patterns just up the road in Hinckley. We literally couldn't really get closer, to come and have a look at this body shell and give us what is known in the general trade as an ROM, which is a useful term where nobody in this business really likes to do, in anything to do with this type of work, likes to give a quote, because we amongst those, because a lot of the work can be quite open-ended. However, obviously there needs to be an analysis of whether such work is vaguely within budget or not. So to deal with that, one would come up with a thing called a reasonable order of magnitude. And Penta have gone away and come up with an ROM for the work involved in making the parts for this body. And that ROM is within the realm of what we were hoping. So that is good, because we were getting a little bit concerned as to the scope of building the body on this. And we now know that it is within scope, and it is within sensible scope. So that's good, because we kind of go out on a bit of a limb with some of these projects, and we push ourselves out of our comfort zones very slightly with some of them, and this would be amongst those. And so to have our kind of guesstimations on the costs of creating the body backed up by somebody that's willing to do the work is very good. So that's a really good progress point. Although it doesn't resolve anything from a viewer's point of view of things you can look at, it resolves a lot of things from our stress point of view and a forward path for the project. So that's really good. So really the next pile of work in terms of the body relies on CAD. So that is going to be George. However, George is working on this. We'll come to that in a minute. Secondary to that is I need to do some work on the chassis. I wasn't rushing into the work on the chassis, because if the ROM had come back horrendously beyond what we had planned on the body, we'd be scratching our heads and coming up with an alternative plan. But it's not, so that's good, so I can get on with work on the chassis. So to that end, Luke has been down and done a very quick little scan. I'm sure he'll mention this as well, but he's been down and done a quick little scan in the cockpit area, because as you'll recall from previous episodes, the owners of this vehicle, there are three of them, visited, and we had them all try seating positions, and I built what, again, you would have seen in previous videos, was a very crude little support for a steering column. We fitted a gear lever, and we fitted a seat in a rudimentary position, just so that we could trial the seating position and the pedals, sorry, so we could try the seating position and just find out what was feasible, what wasn't feasible, whether it was acceptable, whether it wasn't acceptable, etc. That was finalised, positioned the steering wheel correctly, and now we've captured the location of those parts, the seat mountings, which are actually wooden blocks at the moment, because I had to space that back up. We dropped it to suit Cal, actually, his sort of body height, and get him comfortable head clearance wise. Actually, the owners are smaller and wanted the seat higher, so we've actually spaced the seat back up. But we've now captured the seat positions and the steering column position and the gear lever position and all the surrounding bits of car, so we've got a reference for where they need to be, because the next phase is I'm going to be removing all of that, removing the body, removing the engine and the gearbox, removing all of the bits of running gear, and I'm going to be putting the chassis onto our fabrication table and doing some work around the modifications to the chassis. That was always likely to be the case, and this is not, the chassis modifications are not because we're not happy with the chassis. We were in a chicken and egg situation when discussing the chassis with Sport Motive, with Ian at Sport Motive, in as much as we kind of needed a start point, and we weren't about to design the entire car from scratch in CAD with no initial start points in place. And the initial start point was always planned to be a lengthened Sportmotive TVR chassis. Now, there were a couple of areas where that chassis struck me that it would need modifying at the time. Now, I could have got Ian to modify that, but I didn't know how to modify it at the time because I didn't have an engine to trial in it. So there's a little bit of chicken and egg there. So now we've got the chassis, we've got the body on it, we've got the engine in it, we've done the seating position trial, we now know exactly what needs modifying. And rather than sending the chassis back to Ian and saying, can you do these modifications, it makes it a lot easier for me to just do them here. So again, that's not that the chassis is wrong, it's that the chassis needs to evolve now we have all the parts around it. The only way we could perhaps have done that would have been to do it all in CAD to start with. But actually it made more sense to just do this. It's changing a few tubes basically. I need to alter a couple of tubes at the front, and I need to move the lower main chassis tubes inboard slightly for the centre section and narrow it. That area is a little bit suboptimal in that we're actually narrowing the cross section of the chassis, which is going to reduce its torsional rigidity there. However, we are going to box that section of the chassis in more than it would have been on the TVR, which will increase the torsional stiffness, and we are going to be adding the roll frame, which I mentioned before, and the carbon body. So actually I think we'll more than regain that torsional rigidity that we're going to lose, or that we're going to reduce slightly in the centre section. So anyway, that's where we're at on that. So that's next week will be exploded into lots of pieces again and won't look like a Scimitar anymore, unfortunately, because I've got to take it apart to do that work on the chassis. Once that's done, then the chassis is done in inverted commas. It still needs the roll frame putting on, but the roll cage can't go on until we've got the body done, because we're going to scan the inside of the body in order to get a surface. We'll put I think on this particular car, we're going to generate the tube work in CAD, and then I'm going to have it CNC bent, because it will take me a long time with our bender, with our manual bender, to be able to get the tube work close enough to the body in all the right areas. And there's going to be some slightly obscure bends put in that you wouldn't normally have in a roll cage, just in order to incorporate it into this. It's not an R8, it's not a competition spec cage, it's a safety cage to add safety to an otherwise fairly unsafe body. It's not going into competition. That's enough of Scimitar. Moving on to E-Type. Nothing has changed in here. Lots has changed upstairs, so I'm going to shut up at that point and hand over to, well, I'm not going to hand over, but Cal will hand over to George in a bit, and he'll take you through what he's been doing on that, which isn't HVAC. Moving on from that, we'll walk past Saab. As I say, Bobby's off this week. I'm not picking up what Bobby's doing. He was in the midst of the windscreen wiper area, which I think we touched on last week. So I'm going to sign off on that and leave that till next week when we can reappraise where everything's at on that. I might get Bobby to do a bit to camera again quite soon, because I think we're all missing Bobby on camera. I've talked about everything he's been doing for quite a while. I think he needs to do a bit, so we might have Bobby on camera next week. We'll move past this Recaro seat that I've just taken out of the Scimitar and on to the E9. And there's lots of progress on lots of things on this. Stu's absolutely blitzing it, and he's running up to a little wall, and then he's stopping at that wall and moving on to a different bit, and moving up to a wall on that bit, and then moving on to a different bit, and moving up to a wall on that bit. It's sort of multi-pronged attack to dealing with this body shell. So I'm going to put my drink down so I can point at things better. So at the front, you will notice from last week that he now has the front end more or less on. He reshaped this rather squashed front panel, very flimsy panel, hence why it got squashed. No criticism of anybody there. Very hard to ship a panel like that and not sustain any damage. The damage wasn't severe, it had just flattened out a bit. But given the upper and lower panels, which dictate the shape of it, and a little bit of a touch with a shrinker, that's all back to shape. So that's all on. As you can see, doesn't meet this mangled pre-existing E9 very well at all. That's because lots of things need to be sorted out, most notably the front of these wings, which are in a terrible state. This car had been crashed probably several times and was quite rusty. So the front of the wings were not in a particularly good state. So in order to line this front panel area up, we need an accurate bonnet. Now this bonnet has been in several accidents, or certainly one accident, possibly several. However, it appears to be in reasonable condition, other than some very awkward to repair rust at the back. It appears to be the right shape. However, putting it on and roughly aligning the panel gaps are not right. And Stu is understandably and quite correctly concerned about trying to line up the whole front end from a bonnet which is questionable. It appears good. We all looked at it and said, well, it looks right. However, we really want to double check on that, so we want another bonnet, and that's a slightly open-ended area at the minute in that we don't have a replacement bonnet. They are like hen's teeth and very difficult to get hold of. Now, fiberglass and carbon fibre ones are available, but we don't know the quality level of them. And a very kind viewer of ours, who I'm not going to be able to name now because I can't remember his name, I haven't actually spoken to him, got in touch with Cal to say that there is his mate, is a chap by the name of Paul Baker, would be able to help us with some panels, and he has helped us with some panels. The only one, I'll move on to that in a minute, the only one missing from that is the bonnet though. He doesn't actually have a spare bonnet, so we still have a dilemma on that one. However, I need to make some phone calls, which I've been trying to get onto since yesterday, because there may be other possibilities there. So the reason Stu has stopped work on the front is basically because we need to secure a known good bonnet to give us the alignment for the front end panels to make sure that they're right before we fix this front panel in place and move on to the wings. Now, moving on to the wings, going back to Paul Baker, who I mentioned earlier, yesterday Martin went down to see Paul and has collected several panels, which we are extremely grateful for. And they're obviously not cheap, they're not going to be cheap. The parts for these cars are incredibly difficult to get hold of. But we now have a new old stock offside genuine rear quarter panel, an aluminium boot skin and a pair of front wings, one new old stock and one basically new old stock. It has been, I don't really get the history on the other front wing. It looks like a brand new panel that's been fitted to a car and then immediately removed again. It's quite strange, but basically it's got some little pieces let in where the welds would have been made to the car. It's had some there's some sections to be welded in, but they're all in very good condition. It's basically as near to a brand new panel as you're likely to get. So they're in really good condition. So we now have a pair of front wings, which are great, an offside rear quarter, which is the one that really was beyond saving. It was absolutely annihilated, that quarter panel. There's nothing really we could do to save that. We haven't got a near side quarter. It would have been nice to get a near side. Paul couldn't help us with one of those, but that said, the one we have is salvageable. It needs a lot of work. It needs an arch repair section, a lower rear corner section and a lower front corner section, but it is repairable. So we now have all four corners, if you like, dealt with. The boot lid frame will go again, that's okay. So we can use that with a couple of minor repairs with the aluminium boot skin from Paul, which will sort the boot lid out. It's just the bonnet we're stalled on now. So I think there'll be some further discussions with Paul in terms of sourcing a bonnet. And once I've spoken to another chap that I'm about to try and talk to, we'll see if we can get something in the pipeline for a bonnet anyway. So irons in the fire there. So that's what's going on with the front. Moving on to what Stu has then been doing. He's moved on to the doors. We've got these door skins from Woloth and Nesch in Germany. So Stu's been piling through the door repairs. This door's pretty good. He's replaced the bottom on the door, again using an off-the-shelf repair section, which we're very, very impressed by and large with the sections from Woloth and Nesch. They seem to be very good, very reasonably priced, very good quality. So he's replaced the bottom of this door. I think he's done the bottom of the other door as well now. I'm losing track slightly. Yes, I think he's also started work on the bottom of the other door. But the stumbling point then is that on the near side door, this top section here, I mean, this is a good way to show it because it's here on show. This section on the other side is completely rotten nearly all of the way along. And we were just about to make up some little tools to put some of these sections in, and Cal reminded me that had we better just check whether Woloth and Nesch do them. We didn't think they would, because door frames don't normally rot, but evidently on an E9 they do normally rot, because sure enough we can actually buy that section as a kit from Woloth and Nesch. And as we needed to order a couple of other parts that weren't on the first batch of panels, Cal has now ordered one of these for the other door, but he's actually ordered one for this side as well, because somebody's mangled this one with a drill. Goodness knows what was going on there, but it's had a drill thrashed through it in a random fashion. And this little pad at the back, the flanges on it are starting to rot, and the kit for this part is not particularly expensive. So rather than messing around doing localised repairs and risking leaving bits of rust in, we're just going to remove this section on this door as well, still get it set up on the bench, tacked in place so it can't all move, then cut that out, put a new section in, put these pads in, generally sort out any rust pitting and that sort of thing. Then we've got a really good door frame for both sides of the car. Really good situation in that 2 nice door frames is a good start point for the doors. We've got the door skins which look like they fit, look like the lines are all pretty good. Stu's happy there, so really good position to be in, because the outer panel work was always the concern on this car. The structural stuff, the internal stuff really didn't worry us too much, but the outer panel work we knew was going to be the tricky part, because they are so hard to get parts for. They're very hard and very expensive to get panels for these cars. So that's a good situation. Stu's now working on the rear of the car, where we've got a little bit of a hitch, not a major one, and as soon as I finish this video I'm actually going to ring Paul Baker. He said give him a call, give him a video call, so I'm going to do that. We're just going to have a chat about the quarter to rear panel joint, because as far as I can see in the only pictures I can find floating around on the internet, there should be a lap joint between the rear panel and the quarter panel. This is a new old stock quarter which appears to be completely original, and has no lap section for the rear panel, and the rear panel has no lap section either. Now the rear panel is an aftermarket one. I suspect they're supplied without the overlap section that should be on the ends, and we're just going to need to add that on. But I'm trying to keep it, although it's a Restomod, we're just trying to keep the outer panel work as near to factory as we can, so I don't want to start modifying anything there too much if I can try and keep it looking crisp and clean and as per original. So I just want to find out how that joint should be basically, and whether we're missing something, basically which panel's missing a bit. I can't think it's the quarter, because the quarter looks to be exactly as per original. I suspect there's a bit missing off the end of the rear panel. But yeah, basically very good progress. Things are coming together very nicely. Oh yeah, last one on this was we've now also picked up a E30 front crossmember. We were short of an E30 front crossmember. Tim Pollock at Classic BMW Spares had one. We didn't get it. We picked one up from somewhere else who we've had various parts up from before, because we were going up in that direction anyway. And the one from Tim's one was powder coated, and I thought it seems a bit daft for us to buy one that's already powder coated from Tim just to blast the powder coat off again, because we're going to need to blast it all and clean it all up, and not clean it up, there's nothing dirty about it, but we're going to need to blast it anyway to do our zinc metal spray and everything on it. Didn't really want to buy an already powder coated one that he could sell to somebody to bolt straight onto a car when we're going to blast it. However, the other E30 one that we got then turned out not to be an E30 one. It was another E36 one that had been fitted to an E30 of all things. So we've actually just gone back down to Tim and picked up the E30 powder coated one, which we'll use for now. So you'll see a nice powder coated crossmember going on this car at some point in the fairly near future, which will have the powder coat blasted back off it when we come to the stage of doing all the underside work on this car. So yes, that's where we're at in terms of running gear, outside panels. Really the next stage in terms of the structural and running gear side of things is the rear end. Is getting the, we need the rear dampers, the rear coilovers, which are the E28/E34 type, which we need to then fit to work, or we need to have to be able to work out how we're going to do the rear turrets, because we're modifying the original rear turrets. We have to cut a much bigger hole through the rear chassis leg and rear inner wing on this to put a bigger turret in, which I think will come up right up to the parcel shelf area, and to probably tie into the parcel shelf and rear bulkhead, and probably put some tubular bracing in the boot area, because these were notoriously weak, the rear end of these cars, basically to tie the turrets into the rear bulkhead and parcel shelf structure, and to tie them into the rear differential mounting, just to strengthen all that area up. We've then got to refabricate finish refabricating the rear differential mount, and put that extra cross member that we were talking about in several episodes back into the boot floor. So there's all that work to be done as well underneath. So lots of irons in the fire. Stu's juggling a number of things as he always does, progressing them all as he can. And he's very good at that. He's very good at juggling all the jobs against all of the obstacles that prevent them moving forward. That makes it very easy to work with Stu. He's very easy to manage, because he just works around all of the constraints that are put in front of him, that we put in front of him, or that other people put in front of him, and juggles all his jobs to best effect. So yeah, things are looking good. It's good to see a nice new quarter panel. I imagine Stu was very relieved to see that, because the state of the quarter, we'll show that at some point actually, perhaps next week. We'll show the state of the quarter panel that was on this car when it's been removed. It's a poorly sight. moving on from that, past our little Aston Martin wiper motor that's still out there as a sort of, it's like a, I'm trying to think of what the example of that would be. It's sort of like it's like an example of a deformed person on show in medieval times. Can't think of a very good explanation, but it's kind of left out as an exhibit of an over-engineered wiper motor. Perhaps not explaining that very well there. Yeah, it's like the bearded lady of wiper motors. And onto the Aston Martin. Now, as I say, Matthew is currently at a very wet Ashby Magna steam rally, having had a Land Rover breakdown on the way there, and he's got his little tractor on the back on his trailer, and I think from the last message I just saw from him, he's just cracked into his siders to alleviate the feel of the rainfall. But I think the weather is supposed to be cheering up, so he'll be happy about that, and there'll be a lot of steam engines rolling up. I think a few of his mates are turning up in rollers. I know he showed me a picture of one of his mates Invicta steam rollers that's turning up there, that he's roading over there. So yeah, he'll be having some fun. I think a couple of us are hoping to go. I think we might hope to go over on Sunday, but we'll see how we're going. I've potentially got a house move on the cards as well fairly soon, so we've got quite a lot on. Anyway, on to Aston Martin. As you can see, it's got some sort of bodywork and some very strange wheels on it. There's reason behind all of this, which is that the chassis is basically at the point where we could bolt all the suspension on and get it rolling. And we now need to absolutely and very carefully finalise the position of the body tub, the original Aston body tub, onto that chassis. If we get that wrong, we'll have a bit of a problem, and the wheels will be in the wrong places, because obviously they're dictated by the chassis. The body has the wheel coverings, the wings and the quarter panels attached to it. If we get that in the wrong place, the wheels won't be in the middle of the arches. And we've got the CAD, we've got the scan data, we have lots of things digitally, but none of those quite substitute actually having go, look, see, seeing the real parts in front of you. Sometimes it's best to just double check these things if you can. So to that end, we've picked the Aston aluminium bodywork down from the mezzanine. Obviously ignore the front panel, it's a terrible state. Remember, we have a replacement for this waiting to be grafted in up there that we got from ASR Motor Body Engineering. So that's waiting to be grafted in. The bonnet's absolutely mullered. That needs a huge amount of repair work as well, so don't pay too much attention to that either. But underneath that bonnet, we have a Chevy LT1 engine nestling in there, and the Tremec transmission, and the front suspension all bolted on. So Corvette C7 front uprights, which don't really fit inside these 16-inch Jaguar wheels. They kind of hit the upper ball joint, but they are basically on. But we have C7 uprights, C7 upper and lower wishbones. They're all bolted on in place. Everything went together fine, all as you'd expect. We've now put the front bodywork on, and we've now need to move the body forward by around 10 millimeters. If going straight into the detail, within the CAD and scan data, there's a little bit of an error. We don't exactly know where that error's from. Probably the scan stage, I would say, given that the body shell we were scanning was pretty poorly. So we've got about a 5 millimeter difference between front and back, so a total of a 10 millimeter error, and we need to average that error out. And at the moment, that means that the body's, it's not fitted, it's just resting on, but it's resting on about 10 millimeters further back than it should. So we need to deal with that. In order to deal with that, we actually need to slightly modify the H frame, which will be supporting the A pillars and the dashboard and the bulkhead and the pedal box. Which is a frame of 75 to 50 millimeter box section. That needs to be moved forward by about 10 millimeters, because that was mounted based on the forward half of the data, if you like, and so we need to, again, to average out those errors, we need to move that box section forward a little bit. Once that's moved, we were going to sink that box section into the structure of the forward edge of the A pillar, but the A pillar structure becomes pretty complicated in that area if we do that, and it's actually going to prove easier to just move that frame forward slightly, the crossbar up very slightly, and then we can move the body forward slightly, and everything should line up. Once we've done that, we're going to get the body clamped in place, and then on one side at the back we're going to cut out the rear inner arch. We've been hesitating to do that because it'll weaken the back of the body a lot. However, once that's in the correct place, we have a support in under there to carry the back of the body. Once that's tack welded in place, we can then cut out the rear arch, which will then mean we can then fit the Corvette upper wishbones. We've already got the Corvette lower wishbones fitted. We can fit the rear uprights, fit a rear hub and wheel, and then we can just verify, we can put the rear aluminium bodywork on and verify that the wheels are all sitting exactly correctly in the wheel arches and that there's no unexpected things. None of this is a massive problem. It's just making sure there's nothing unexpected and that the CAD hasn't, we've not been led down the garden path by a scan or CAD or things. It's better to put it actually in the flesh and double check. So we're going to do that. Once we're certain that's all correct, the aluminium bodywork will all come back off again. We can get rid of the horrible Jaguar wheels again out of the way, and then we can get on with all of the rear end fabrication, which I'm really looking forward to actually getting this body attached to the chassis and getting onto some of the sheet metal work and start to make it look like a car and less like a climbing frame, because it's just not a very pretty thing to look at with all that box section welded amongst it at the moment. And also removing some of the horrendous Aston Martin factory metalwork from the back would actually be quite nice, because some of the welding is just an offence to the eyes. It's really not very nice. So we're going to remove the rear tubs. Matt's already removed the rear bulkhead section. We'll remove the remains of the rear chassis rails that go to the rear panel, remove the rear valance rear panel, basically remove pretty much the whole rear end. And we're going to fabricate new tubs, which won't have splits and welds all the way around them, new rear bulkhead, new chassis rail extensions from the new chassis out to the rear corners and to pick up the rear panel. It'll all be nice new metal, nice new shapes, pretty stuff done neatly, nice reinforcing beads and just some nicely thought out sheet metal work going on in there. So that should all come together very nicely. Moving on from that, in the body prep area, Gaz is working his way through. He's been doing some other little tasks as well, but he's working his way through the flat and polish of the Jag, and I think he's pretty much got, other than one front wing by the looks of it, he's pretty much there with all of the flatting now. He's pretty much getting to the stages of polishing when he will be sealing himself up at this end, sealing off all the workshop grit from in there and getting through mopping it all. And we're pretty much then at the stage of it needing to wheel through to next door and start being in a position to have parts bolted onto it. Now we're a little way away from being able to bolt parts onto it, but that will be the next stage. So yeah, we best get our skates on. On that note, I think it's probably time to hand over to Cal. Actually, I meant to do it this week, but I'm going to do it next week. It's been a while since we've done any questions and answers. So if anybody wants to send any questions in, send us some. And I'll go through and pick a few out and try and answer a few of your questions. I'm sure there must be some. I try to keep an eye on comments, but the last few weeks have been a bit manic. There's been quite a lot going on, so I haven't had a chance to look at the questions really. But yeah, next week I'm going to do some questions and answers. So yeah, over to Cal.
Thank you very much, Nat. And Project Coupe, which may well not be in the video next week. So I think this is going to be delivered early next week. We obviously saw it being detailed down the den last week, brought it back here for final spanner checks and a few very, very minor details. Just wanted to go back over everything on the underside now. It's done a few more miles again. We basically photograph all the sort of safety critical fasteners. We paint mark them, photograph them and upload all of those photos into the vehicle's kind of history media file. And yeah, it's all looking good. So I think this is going to be off the ramp in the morning, put to one side under a cover until it's picked up. And then very briefly, we'll get to see Project One back, because what we're doing is a quick swap over of the two so we can do the refinements we did to the throttle linkage, idle control and map, basically to improve the idle control and the sort of low throttle drivability, which will be good, and it might even give us an opportunity to maybe do a little in-car video in Project One with a bit of luck, because I am very aware that we sort of almost alluded to doing an in-car video with this, and now we've kind of run out of time. But I think we may have the opportunity in Project One, so that is good. Camaro, Luke's been working on this, and although he would normally talk about the stuff he's doing, I suspect he didn't mention this in his segment, which is that he's been doing a retaining bracket to hold the instruments into the original dash, which actually I've got right here. So this is essentially the original dash fascia, which has a very, very heavily kind of slash cut recess for the instruments. And we've got these classic instruments gauges, which fit nicely in terms of the size, but they don't really have anything that will retain them nicely. So I think this is a prototype. It might have a quick edit, but he's basically designed a printed retaining piece that holds all of those in. He's also now finished the design for the warning light modules. So there's 3 separate pieces that sit at the top of that. One with 3 lights between the instruments and one each side, which will have like the indicator telltales, oil pressure warning light, temperature warning light, whatever. It might not be temperature actually, things like charge warning light. So they are just being 3D printed by ProTotal at the minute, who we use for 3D print stuff when we want it to be a really, really nice visual finish, because that will be the final finish on those parts. As soon as that's back, all of the dash can go together, and we've just sent off the bezels that sit around the bonnet pins for anodizing, and as soon as they're back we can get the bonnet pins in, attach the bezels on the outer part of the bonnet, and yeah, we'll be pretty much ready for testing then. It fires up as is. I think the only other thing we've got to do before then is fit the oil pressure and coolant temperature senders. And yeah, that'll be ready for the road, which is good. And then speaking of things firing up, very excitingly, we fired up the Allegro for the first time this week. In fact, I think we just had it fired up prior to last week's video going out, but didn't quite catch it in time. But yeah, due to the culmination of some good work all round, everything went very well, and it pretty much just fired straight up, idle smoothly, no horrific noises. I think the only thing that initially that scared us a little bit is the starter motor was a bit lazy, and I think it was just kind of catching on the flywheel slightly and making a bit of an odd noise. So we've taken that back out. I think it needs freeing up a bit. We swapped it for the one on the other car, and that one works perfectly. So I think it's just a little bit sticky for some reason, even though it has been rebuilt. So yeah, all very exciting stuff. And we also went did the fairly nerve-wracking operation of seeing whether the VTEC was working correctly. Because if you remember when we showed that engine disassembled, it's quite a complicated arrangement of oil-actuated pins, essentially, that move across to attach one set of rockers to another set. And it relies on there being a reasonable amount of oil pressure in the engine. Obviously, when it's actually actuated in use, the map on the ECU will tell the solenoid that initiates the VTEC what RPM to kick in at, but we can manually override that. So in theory we can kick the VTEC in at any RPM, but it does need the oil pressure to be over a certain level to actually physically have enough pressure to actuate the pins. So yes, I had a nerve-wracking job of basically revving it up to probably about 3,000 or 4,000 RPM, and then having Alex manually actuate the VTEC, at which point it was like, will it work perfectly, or will we have valves smashing into pistons from fire and brimstone? But no, it clicked, and you could hear the change in tone as the cam profile changed, and undid it and went back again. So that is good. So then they've been going through, just doing a few refinements on things on that. We noticed the alternator was overcharging, and again we swapped it for the one on the other car, and that one's fine. So it seems like one alternator and one starter, despite all 4 of them being rebuilt by the same place, is not doing what it should. But we've got the one that is charging correctly on there now. Electrically everything looks good. We've been doing a few edits to the vacuum chamber on there, which holds the idle control valve, because we didn't realise that one of the elbows we'd used was very restrictive. So it was not, we were only seeing like a 200 RPM difference between essentially a fully open idle valve and a fully shut idle valve, which took us a while to get our heads around. But we realised in the end that, yeah, if you just had the pipe completely removed, you'd have a 600 RPM difference, but then if you took the idle valve off the reservoir and plugged the pipe into it, it was only 200 RPM, and it was actually the elbow the push fit elbow where the pipe went into the reservoir that was the issue. So we're resolving that. Steve's just been finishing off actually for both cars, the amplifier wiring harness, and then this one's done to the point they were able to fire that up, get an initial calibration into the Audison system. So we're running like a 8-channel Audison amp on these, with separate channels for the tweeters, the tweeters, the bass drivers in the doors, and the components in the rear, such that we don't need to use an external crossover to split the frequency between the tweeter and the bass driver. We program that into the Audison. So we've done the initial calibration on that Audison, and that is all working well as well. So yeah, it's really kind of exciting. We just need to get this idle control valve vacuum plumbing sorted, and I think at that point we're going to be pretty close to being able to initially just try chugging it around, make sure brake and clutch and all that sort of stuff works as it should, and then probably head to the rollers, which will be equally nerve-wracking and exciting. Right, I think on that note I'm going to hand over to the CAD Den and see what's been going on there.
Cool. Hi guys, and welcome back to the Fusion Festival. This week I'm going to kick it off with the reason I'm not in work uniform and I look a little bit like Saddam Hussein with the unibrow. I am currently downstairs sanding the carbon arches on the Allegro on purpose. I'm currently up here. I was downstairs sanding the carbon arches on the Allegro. The indicator vents, which I think I talked about last week, getting finalised, have now been ordered through. We did an outsourced 3D print through a great company called ProTotal. They have been absolutely class in both the manufacturing quality of what we've had delivered so far, because I think eagle-eyed viewers might remember that we outsourced to a different company a little while back and it was shocking. We got it back and honestly we just ended up 3D printing that part in-house in the end because it was that bad. ProTotal, on the other hand, not only are brilliant in terms of their quality, but they've also been brilliant in terms of giving us advice in terms of manufacturing parts that even maybe they can't manufacture, but they will know people that can. So those are on their way now, and so in preparation for that I've been sanding out the aperture for them, because until the design was finalised we didn't want to make any cuts in the actual body to fit them in. Now that I have an actual final prototype for it that's been signed off and ordered, I can go ahead with using that prototype to kind of scallop out the aperture to the correct shape, and then when they arrive they're ready to basically just go straight in. Yesterday I put the lower vents back in as well in that car. All the wiring down there was completed and they don't need to get down there anymore, so I put those in. They look awesome. They were also from ProTotal, so thank you guys again. And then I think that's it for what I'm going to talk to you on the Allegro. Moving on to Churchill, a job that I was putting off because not putting off, I had other stuff to do, but a job that I've picked up back up again, and I was kind of dreading, but it's actually gone relatively smoothly so far, is the Churchill door lock mechanism. So here is the handle for the original Mark II Jaguar, and that is the Jaguar lock barrel. And as you probably know, we're not going to be using standard Mark II Jaguar locks on this car. We are using central locking and a more modern lock mechanism, and so my job was to convert the original Jag door handles and lock mechanism to use the new, basically the push button and the lock barrel, to then use the more modern, I think the X300 door locks that we have in the Churchill Jaguar. Way I've done that, pretty simple. Push the key in, that pushes on the crank, which in turn, can't hold it properly, which in turn presses down on the unlock on the car. And then the other function that it does is in the car you have a manual unlock, so you turn the key, that presses down on that, and then boom, you can unlock your car manually. Given that like the battery dies or something like that, you always want to have a manual way of doing it. So I'm just now waiting on one ball joint to come so I can prototype that in the car, and then that should hopefully be good to go. And then I think, oh wait, that's not it for cars at Retropower. I've also completed the first iteration for the alternator bracket on the E-Type. Sounds like a pretty simple job, but so both basically the mounts for it are in quite weird places, where you've got two on this side of the engine, one on this side of the engine up here, and one on the inside on this side of the engine set in a bit over here. So number one, you have to get those in the exact right position. But the other thing is alternator brackets need to be fairly beefy, because the alternator is quite heavy and they have a tendency to shear off. So the other challenge that I've had with that is kind of making it beefy, but in a way that actually fits. Because as you would have heard me and George say many a time for this car, that's pretty difficult. So
more on that in a minute.
More on that in a minute from George. So yeah, that is now ready to prototype, and hopefully that is both beefy enough to hold the alternator correctly. I think it will be, and that also fits all the bolt holes in the correct locations. And then that is it for stuff at Retropower this week, because I've also been doing stuff down at the Den, or for the Den I should say. Number one is a ex-Retropower car, the Quattro. That's had a new gearbox in and in turn a new shifter. So a few weeks back, scanned the tunnel. I think last week I told you I did the initial design for that for the shifter mount itself. There was a slight tweak to that just to change the angle on it, and then that has now been made and handed over to the guys at the Den to test fit and then come back with any feedback or go, hey, this is great, well done, Luke. We'll see. So that's over there, and once they've either confirmed that or we've confirmed the changes needed, I can go ahead with manufacturing the rest of that setup, and then they can get that all bolted in, shift the mount in the car, and then continue with their work on that going forward. Then the other thing for the Den, I think I talked about this before, but the Morris mud flap thingamabobs, like the stylized mud flaps I did for them, prototyped them last week. They were so close to being bang on, I just misjudged. It's got a flange on the inside of the arch, and that kind of tapers down to a point. And where it tapers down to, I thought it was a lot thinner than what it actually is, but actually the flange comes out a little bit more than what I thought it did. So now I've made a slight edit to that. That's literally about to finish printing as we speak, and then I can head back over to the Den and test that. Along with that, I've also done those rear light covers as a prototype as well, just to make sure that it does clear anything and there wasn't anything in the scan that I missed. There's also the slight caveat that the emergency boot pull is somewhere around that area, so I didn't want to be impeding that, and I did want to test that, so that is also on the printer. Fiber and SEC intakes have been sent over to the Den as well. They're really happy with that. We're now moving on to making them as final parts, and yeah, I think as per usual I'm probably forgetting something, but other than that I'm gonna hand over to George. Thanks guys.
Thank you, Luke, for handing over to me. So this week I have been, well, this week and the last couple of weeks, as you've probably been aware, I've been working on general E-Type engine bays. So as Luke alluded to a moment ago, the engine bay on an E-Type is rather cramped, so fitting everything in we want to fit in is quite difficult. And if anyone kind of knows intimately an S3 E-Type, specifically its engine bay, is they're very dense in terms of, not dense, sorry, cluttered. So all the tanks, so brake reservoir tanks and washer tanks, they all kind of look like they were an afterthought and they've been just thrown in. So we're really trying to give it the Retropower treatment and not have it look like that. So what I've been specifically working on this week is, I'll get some B-rough for Jamie obviously, but is a combined tank and pedal box. So Jim, God, probably years ago at this point, created a pedal box model for the E-Type, and I've kind of expanded off of that. Resulting there's not very much of it left. So long story short, where the pedal box goes on the S3 E-Type, we're now converting it to have, that'll be billet, which supports a slightly different pedal to the standard one. But what it's also going to do is be the housing for some tanks. So this dense little piece of design has got the mount for the pedal box, the mount for the master cylinder, the mount for the washer motor, the washer pump. It's also the washer tank, the breather tank, and the brake reservoir. Not all one tank, before someone says that. They're all separated, and resulting in this block of design, which has kind of got a lot going on. And yeah, so I've been kind of working on this, trying to do it in the most effective way. So what we're doing with it is it's going to be billet top and bottoms for all the tanks, and then we'll do a fabricated middle with that then welded in, which is what we've done before in other tanks, and it kind of means you haven't got to start with such a huge block of billet, which obviously brings the cost down a little bit. And then yeah, it's just been generally working through that, general engine bay things. One thing which we're trying to accomplish on this one is, in the past we've developed a system for having it so caps on billet tanks always tighten to the same point. So to fair, I've got a little model here. I think we've explained it before, but it's got an O-ring around the outside, and what happens is you screw the cap down and it bottoms out on the actual housing of the tank, and the sealing is done from the O-ring on the outer face. The problem with that is you can't really, how do I word this? You can't tailor where the cap tightens down to, because obviously the machining of the threads and all this kind of stuff. So a cap like this, it could tighten up this way, or it could end up tightening up this way. It'll always tighten to the same point, but we don't know where that orientation is going to be. On these tanks, I want to run a cap similar to this, which is a shrunk down version of the fuel cap, which then left us the problem of where we want to be able to crank or clock all the caps, like in the CAD here. So they're all facing all the same direction. And obviously without getting into the kind of depths of machining, that's quite a difficult thing. So between me and Nat, we figured out a way of doing it, which is we're going to have a little ring which effectively make the threads in the tank longer than normal, and have a little ring which will then tighten up to the bottom of this, which can then have a tack weld put on it. That will then allow us to clock where this is going to be orientated to and have it looking like this, or maybe the other way. Just little details like this is things that take a load of time and figuring out, but in the end goal will make it just kind of look that little bit better. But yeah, I'm going to stop rambling now and ranting, either, and hand back to Cal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George. And now, using the power of teleportation, let us visit the den. And welcome back to the den. And actually, before we go any further, I'm going to do a little thing just to sort of bring people who are maybe new followers up to speed a little bit on the relationship between this workshop and the Retropower workshop. Long-term followers will be completely aware of this, but essentially at Retropower we undertake complete start-to-finish vehicle projects, whether that could be a standard restoration. Largely the projects we're doing are modified builds, and often customers come to us just with a concept. They don't even own the car, leave us to source the donor car or cars, and take it all the way through from literally design drawings and models to a finished turnkey car. The den has been set up to take on smaller work, which we always get asked about doing at Retropower, but we're not really set up to do anymore. So this one reason for this facility was to be able to do the ongoing maintenance of Retropower projects, but that allowed us to also open up our services to do smaller jobs, whether that be just servicing work, and those jobs often start with a full inspection, or small modification projects. So there are a smattering of all of those things around us at the minute. But yeah, if you want us to look after your car here, just get in touch. So you can email nick@thedenautomotive.co.uk. I think we're booking for somewhere around September. It is currently June 2025. I always forget when I'm doing date time references that this video could be watched at any point. So yeah, get in touch. Right, moving inside. E30 M3, absolute dream car for me really, as you can probably tell by my E30 over there. This one's a lot nicer. It's absolutely immaculate underneath. This came in for our usual inspection, big report back to the customer. There was no horrors really discovered on this one, a few little pointers here and there. He's had us just going through some things just to absolutely bring it up to perfection. And one of the things we noticed was the geometry on the rear, which is not adjustable as standard. So it's a trailing arm, it's a fixed beam, which is on rubber bushes onto the car. Then the diff, a mount on the diff, which is like the third mount for the subframe. And then two trailing arms, which are on rubber bushes, which are slightly angled. And there are no adjustments on any of that. So your camber swings quite a lot during the suspension travel, but essentially you have no camber adjustment and no toe adjustment. And often what you find on E30s generally, when you lower them, obviously you get a lot more negative camber on the back, which you can't dial out. So what a lot of people do is put eccentric bushes on, where the hole through the middle of the bush where the bolt goes is actually slightly off to one side. And that means you can rotate the whole of that bush within its outer housing and move the point at which the bolt goes through, which, if you imagine that with the bolt actually fixed on the subframe, means it's basically moving the arm kind of in a circle as you adjust it, so it goes up, forward, down, back, which means that you effectively get both toe and camber adjustment, and that's what we're doing on this. So we're putting eccentric bushes on it so we can do a bit of a fine tune of the geometry on the back. So that's where we're at with that. And then mine is on the ramp over there, and miracle of miracles, it does actually have its new fuel tank in part thanks to Owen, who was working on it a little bit yesterday. I pulled the old tank out last weekend, So again, for those who aren't watching us every week, I've had this car for quite a few years now. It's been just languishing, unloved for quite a while, and I doubt I've had it on the road for probably 5 years, I'd guess, and I'm planning on going in about 2 weeks' time to Poland in it, which I think is a couple of 1,000-mile round trip. So I'm in slight panic stations about getting it ready. But one of the things when I went through it all that caught me slightly off guard is that the inside of the fuel tank was really rusty. So I've pulled the old one out, got a new tank, pump, filter, all of that's going in. I've done the alternator on it now because that was actually the reason it came off the road, is that it stopped charging, and that was years ago. While I was doing that, I've done the auxiliary belt, idler, tensioner, and then I'm working my way through everything else and inspecting it roughly underneath. I pretty much need to replace everything between the bumpers, I'd say. So I've got on the cards lower arm bushes, track rod ends, I think one of the actual track rod itself, rat gaiters. I think I'm going to need to do, probably as a precautionary measure, brake calipers, probably discs and pads. I need to replace a radiator because I noticed that was weeping. So yes, as is often the case, for those who work on their own cars will know this only too well. You start with a job list, and each time you tick one job off, in the process of doing that job, you've discovered 2 more jobs, so the job list just gets bigger, which is unfortunate. Under here is the VR6, which apparently now identifies as Luke's property. I think he'll be very sad to see that go. And actually, on the subject of Luke, I'm going to hand over to him to talk about the Lupo, because he's been on that quite a lot this week.
Hi all, me again. So the Barchetta has turned into a bigger job. The customer, as you know, I've told you the other week that they wanted some trimming doing inside the car for the storage compartment of the convertible roof. He also mentioned the clutch was really noisy when he was depressing the clutch pedal after it'd done about 70 mile when it was red hot. So we looked into that, took the gearbox off, found that the release bearing had collapsed, and then it was putting uneven pressure on the cover plate. So I went down the lines of brand new clutch kit, new fork arm, new bushes, sweet as a nut now, so the customer's going to be well happy about that. That was one job this week. I'll take you inside and give you an update on the Lupo. Because it's a sign, it's real. It's document. It's a legal document, I'm telling you. So as you can see, the Lupo has finally moved off of the 2-poster ramp. The engine's in and she runs. Not so well, but that's only because we've got no boost pipes on, so there's a lot of unmetered air going around, so it doesn't like that, but it does run. Front end's on, alley rad's on. We've had the front crash bar modified to house the intercooler. Because the radiator's that much thicker, it's pushed the intercooler out further, which has made it touch everything and rattle against everything. So we've modified the crash bar, reinforced the crash bar, and now the intercooler fits without touching anything. Also, because of said radiator being larger, the old hard boost pipe that was going down here was like, the hole's about that big of a gap, and the boost pipe was just touching everything, rattling everything. I think it was an AliExpress special. So we've mocked up a nice custom shaped one. That is away being welded up. So once that's all in, we should be able to put everything all together, run it up to temperature, and then we're not far off a road test. I am currently in a driver's footwell having a nightmare trying to attach the clutch pedal to the clutch master. As you can see, I'm not the slimmest of guys, so yeah, it's a bit uncomfortable. All right. So anyway, excuse that clown. So that's the update on the Lupo. It's just nice to see it all back together and off the ramp, if I'm honest. So yeah, I think that's pretty much all I've been doing this week. So I shall pass you over to the big cheese Nick, who can take you around the workshop. See you again soon.
Thank you very much, Luke. So just a quick bit on the MGF. The customer dropped off a load of used parts for this. So we've got some stuff we can work through now, loads of stuff that's in better condition than what's on the car. We've made a decision pretty much that we're going to refurbish the original rear subframe. It's not too bad, but we'll blast it. It has been slightly modified for the exhaust that's on the car as well. and then we'll blast it, zinc metal spray, powder coat that, so basically lasts forever. James has done the seats for this, which you'll see in a couple of minutes, which is great, and the door cards, we've done some highlights on the door cards as well, so that's all coming along really nicely. The only other thing I will quickly show you, which is quite exciting, is only just a couple of hours ago we had a new ramp delivered. So this is going to go in this area here. So Martin and I are spending the next day or two just installing this, get it bolted to the ground. We've got the electric feed pre-installed so we can connect that up. It's only single phase, nice and straightforward. We can get that signed off. And then it gives us a bit of extra capacity. And actually what's kind of weird is that even though we're not done much different, it feels like we've got loads more workshop space, which is great because I think we're actually using this kind of bay here a bit more constructively. And I think I touched on before that we've taken out a bit of the mezzanine above just to allow a longer car. Otherwise it would have been sort of small minis and MG Metro turbos on here only, which wouldn't have been ideal. I think that's it from me, and I'm going to hand upstairs to James.
Hi again, welcome back. This week we have been busy with the Mercedes 500 is now stripped pretty much. The leather's here, so I'll be sending some of that off to Perth this week for the centres. Then Ellie will come in and hopefully cut and machine a lot of that. Should be pretty straightforward. It's just going black to blue. The door cards are off, so I'll show you how I'm hopefully going to do the door cards in a minute maybe. And yeah, we'll crack on with that. Hopefully make some good progress on that next week. The second Allegro, Ellie's bound that, so as soon as they're ready I can go over and put both carpets in. We've kind of held fire on putting the brown carpet in so far, just because Alex is climbing all over it at the minute, getting it running, so probably better to wait so it's not, don't make the carpet dirty basically, so yeah. So probably maybe even do them both together. And then mainly it's been the Quattro this week, so Ellie has done the centres on the seats in the Quattro material. She's got the lines to match up perfect, which is amazing because it's one of my favourite things to do as a trimmer is to get the fabric lining up perfect, and it's literally perfect, so that's great. The dash is now back in. I was a bit worried about that with the flocking, having to sand it down, trying to get it as smooth as possible, but I think it's come out really well, so happy with that. Glove box is back in. I've made the patterns for the carpet, so we're going to make a press-stud section over the tunnel to try and hide some of the wires and everything, make it a bit more car-y. Put some mats in there so it's a bit more plush. The doors are back in, they look really good. So I've done, as you'll see on the video, you'll see I've done the shape to match the roll cage, so when the door's shut, it lines up with the roll cage. That looks really good. That's in the same material as the seats. And then I just need Luke to come over and scan some few bits for the headlining, and we're pretty much on top of that. That's pretty much 90% done, so yeah. So mainly next time you see me, it'll be, hopefully, there'll be some parts maybe fitted on the Merc, which will be really good. I'm really excited for that one, so yeah, I'll hand back.
All good?
That is all good. Ready whenever you are, mate.
Well, thank you very much for that, James, and what a beautiful sunny day it is now. Yeah, there's Kuma waiting behind me, patiently waiting for collection. So on that note, like and subscribe, and we shall see you in a week's time.